Good afternoon and welcome to Markets Today. I'm your host, Mbithe Mwema. It's Thursday. We are getting to the tail end of this week. We have a lot of fantastic things lined up for you. As usual, we will start off by looking at the NSE. What was happening yesterday, what was hot, what was cold, and we will be able to give you an overview because yesterday, interestingly, turnover almost doubled. I will share the statistics in a few. When we take a break, we come back, we are discussing the banking sector. It's the end of the third quarter, which ended the end of September 30th, 2020. Anytime from the end of October, we expect the Tier 1s to start announcing the results for that period, followed by the Tier 2s in the early to mid of November. We are trying to understand what could have possibly changed and how should we evaluate the banks as we go to the end of the year to answer the key question as to whether there is an opportunity to pick up some of these banks for the long term. That's a conversation we will be having later on by our guest in studio, Mr. Reginald Kadzutu, who is an economist. I'll give you an overview of that conversation as we go in later on into the show. For now, let's start off with an overview of the NSE. How were the indices performing? Yesterday, what we saw with equity turnover, it almost doubled, up 96 percentage points to 599 million shillings. That was the value of turnover on the NSE. Foreign investors were driving this performance. They accounted for 96% of the sales vis-a-vis 68% of the purchases. The foreign investors have slowly been changing tact, and yesterday was the biggest day that we have seen them turn net sellers out of the NSE, meaning they're selling out more than they are buying into the NSE. The key stocks that they were selling out of were primarily Safaricom, which had touched a high of 30.1 shillings per share. We saw a bit of profit taken by the investors at that level. When you start seeing net selling activity, you really want to keep tabs and see, is this going to be a continued trend? Because if so, it gives you an indication that there will be a softening of prices in coming weeks. A bit more of that later on. Let's take a look at what was happening with the indices. The NSE All Share lost 0.17 percentage points to close the day at 139.97 points. NSE 20 share is now down 11.22 percentage points and it is trading at 1,819.27 points. The thing that we are looking at when you're looking at the NSE, it's trading at a multiple, price earnings multiple of 9.2 times. So the question is it a good time to get in? Because the last 6-year average in terms of the price to earnings ratio has been 13 times. So we are at a low. Question is, does the market go lower or are there opportunities for you to look at some of the stocks for the longer term? That's the key thing that you need to be considering at this point in time. Let's take a look at what was happening on equity turnover, the trajectory for this particular curve. So as I had mentioned earlier, there was a near doubling of equity turnover. It jumped 96 percentage points over the day. From the chart on your screens, turnover was up to 599 million shillings. That's the total value of the number of shares traded on the NSE multiplied by the price of each and every single share. 599 million, the majority of this was by the foreigners. Of this 599, on one side of the trade, foreigners sold out 96%. The majority sale on this particular day was Safaricom and a bit of KCB. On the flip side, the foreigners were 68% of the trades in terms of purchases, making them net sellers on the NSE. Let's take a look at who the top movers were by virtue of equity turnover. Equity turnover, Safaricom was the dominant trade for the day. It traded 12.379 million shares at a price of 30.1 shillings. The cumulative turnover, which is really the price multiplied by the volume, was 372 million shillings traded over the day. That's slightly over half of the trades that we saw yesterday, comparing 372 to the total market turnover of 599. KCB Group saw 4.26 million shares traded at a price of 37.55 per share, which totaled to 106.2 million shillings worth of turnover. Equity Group was not too far off. At an average price of 35 shillings, we saw the share trade 1.3 million over the day. Cumulatively, that was a value of 44.961 million. Kenya Power was also up there at an average price of 1.75. It saw 4.6 million shares traded at a cumulative turnover of 8 million shillings. BOC Kenya was also up there at a price, this is British America Tobacco, and that's at a price of 340 shillings per share. 8,900 shares were traded at a cumulative value of 3 million. Who are the top movers by volume? Let's take a look at that. Centum Investments for a second day running. At the current price, we have been seeing some of the analysts say that there is an opportunity to buy it on the low with the hope that it could actually enhance its value over time. I hope you can join us tomorrow on Ask Mbithe. On Ask Mbithe, we will be discussing Centum. Who is Centum? What are the key operations? How has the share price performed over time? And is there value or not, based on the analysis that we will be doing tomorrow? I sure do hope you can join us, and if it's of interest, please send us some of your questions. We can read up on them in advance and be able to answer you as we go through the show. Back to the top movers. Centum, 4.8 million shares traded over the day. Safaricom, 3.8 million shares traded over the day. Kengen, 1.4 million. Equity Group, 1.1 million. And KCB Group, 543,000 shares traded. Who are the top gainers on price? Top gainers, again dominated by the small caps, has been the trend over this entire week. Express Kenya up 7.91 percentage points to trade at 4.5 shillings per share. Uchumi again up 7.4 percentage points to trade at 0.29. The other interesting one was Kenya Re, which has also been recovering, albeit by a little percentage sum, up 3 percentage points to 2.27. This is slightly higher than what we had seen last week at 2.2 shillings per share. But the trend we have seen is when it gets to 2.2, anything above that, we see a bit of investors, the retail investors, taking profit. In other words, selling out of the stock. So we see the price coming down. 2.27, we will continue to look at it, but our expectation will be between today and tomorrow. The price will probably correct downwards as some investors take profit. In other words, sell out of the stock. Who are the top losers for the day? Umeme was down 5.61 percentage points to close the day at 7.06 shillings per share. Kabasid also lost ground, lost 5 percentage points to 8.52 shillings per share. Longhorn was also part of the losing streak, down 4 percentage points to 4.5 shillings per share. TransCentury also continues on its downward trend for a second day running, down 4 percentage points to 1.6 shillings per share. Last but not least, East African Cables, down 4 percentage points to 1.43 shillings per share. That's pretty much what is happening in the markets. By way of corporate news, this has been a very slow week, nothing much happening, but the local dailies were alluding to the possibility of a downward trend when it comes to the credit that the banks will be extending to the private sector. That's either to businesses or to individual households. The expectation is that these numbers could come from where they currently are, which is at about 8% to 6.9%. Largely because of the uncertainty that COVID-19 has brought to the economy, as well as possibly the uncertainty that could possibly have an impact on the economy based on the political scene, with Kenya going to the polls in the year 2022, and between now and then, the possibility of a referendum or the possibility of taking a vote on the Building Bridges initiative, which is the BBI. This uncertainty is sort of going to get into the space of the banking sector, but the banking sector has two options. It can either lend to the private sector, that's you and I, or to the businesses out there, or it could lend to the government of Kenya. The government of Kenya certainly has a healthy appetite for debt. meaning that the banks will still be able to make money one way or the other. It's just a question of who are they going to be lending to. To understand the trajectory of what this possible decision could have in impact on the earnings for these banks, or what to look out for as we await the third quarter 2020 financials, we are joined by Mr. Reginald Kazutu, who is an economist, to help us unpack the trajectory for the banking sector in Kenya. We take a short break. When we come back, we will start talking about the banking sector, what is good, what is bad, what's the ugly thing to look out for, and more importantly, are there pockets of opportunity for you to invest in when you are looking at the 12 opportunities available to you in the banking sector on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. As always, we would like to hear from you. Our SMS line is 20146. You could also reach out to me, that's Mbithe Mwema, on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. You could also reach out to us on our Metropole TV handle, that's at Metropole TV on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram or LinkedIn. We would like to hear your comments. We would also invite you to ask us any questions, and we are more than willing and ready to answer you. See you after the break.